Hey guys, this is Carrie, and in this video we're going to start working on our game. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is create a brand new replit. I called it Circle Game. It's just going to be a simple game for me with circles and maybe some more complex graphics that you guys have been working on. We'll figure out how to import those over. So I opened that up here in full screen and then also here in the editor. So I'm going to collapse that down so it's easier to see. Our entire game is going to take place on the canvas element. So let me create a canvas element. Let's give it a width and a height. So the width will be 800 and the height will be 600, which are the dimensions that I've been using consistently. For the style, let's make our canvas a little bit easier to see. So we'll select the canvas and then we'll give it some border of some sorts, like, I don't know, 10 pixels, solid, purple. I'm also going to give it a border radius so that, let's see, just 5 pixels, so it's a little bit like smoother curved, and then I'm going to display it so that's in the center by doing display block margin auto. Alright, so I think for now, we've got our canvas, hopefully in the middle of our screen. Awesome. Okay, so you can obviously style this however you like. The one thing that I would say to avoid styling with the CSS is to avoid styling the background of the canvas. Because as we saw before when we draw animations, the first step to redrawing our game will be to erase everything from the last screen, like the old player position, the old enemy positions. So draw the background fresh to erase everything, and then to redraw the characters, the sprites, wherever we'd like them to be. Alright, so maybe I'll throw a background on the entire page. So body, and then I'll just do background black. And you'll see that momentarily this will make the background of the canvas black as well. But we're going to change that in the JavaScript. Okay, so for the JavaScript here, we're going to start the same way that we always do. We're going to be interacting a lot with the canvas element. So let's select the canvas by doing let canvas equal document.querySelector canvas. Now from the canvas element, we're going to have to get the context, which is the set of tools that allows us to draw on the canvas. So let's let the context, which you'll notice I'm using CTX, it's like the word context, C-O-N-T-E-X-T, without some letters, be equal to the canvas.getContext, and we'll get the 2D context. So let's just briefly run this and see if we get any errors. It doesn't look like it, but let's check the developer tools. So JavaScript console. Awesome, no errors. So things are looking pretty good here. All right, now the same way that we were when we were drawing our figures, defining groups of functions to make things easier, or groups of code as functions to make things easier, I'm going to define a function called drawBackground, which will include all of the steps to draw the background of this. So in order to do that, we say, hey, I'm going to define a function now, which is a group of code, and then we give that function a name. Because a function is an action, we put these little parentheses here, and if we need to include any extra information, we tell the function what extra information by putting it inside the parentheses. But to draw the background, we're just going to color the whole thing. So we don't need any extra information. So we're going to do ctx.fill_style with a capital S, camel case, is equal to just a different color here. I'm going to do, let's see, light green. ctx.beginPath, ctx.fillRect. And the way that we're going to fill the rectangle here is that we're going to go from 0, 0, the top left corner, 800 as its width, and 600 as its height. And then we're going to do ctx.fill. And I think that's all of the steps that we use. Let's just make sure that things are working. So I'm going to do a refresh here. You'll notice that the computer doesn't automatically run this function. This is our code to teach the computer what it means when we say to draw the background. So now if we go over to the console, or in our editor, we write draw background with the parentheses, it will color in the background light green. Alright, so if we refresh it, that will go away, and it will have it the same color as normal. Alright, so let's see. We're also going to do a function called drawPlayer. And when we draw the player, this one is actually going to take some extra information into it. So I'm thinking that the best way that we can work with our player is if we group together all of the information about our player as one array or list of values. So I'm going to say let player info equal a list of values. Now, for the player info, I'm thinking that it's going to be the X and Y positions for the center of the player. It's also going to be, let's see, we could do the X speed and Y speed. So we might have to come back to this, but I'm thinking that this might be all the information that I need for my player so far. So I'm going to put X and Y. I'll start the player off in the center. So half of the width and half of the height. And I'm going to start the player off with an X speed of 1 and a Y speed of 0. And what that should mean is that the player is going to the right. Alright, so let's see how we use this information. So now when we run the drawPlayer function, we need to include this player info as part of what we're putting into the function so that the function can access the location of the player as well as maybe the speeds. So when we define this function, we'll say, okay, whenever we draw the player, we need to tell it the player info, which will be a list that looks similar to this. So what we're going to do here for the player info is we're going to say, okay, I'm going to create a yellow player character, like Pac-Man or something, with, I'm going to give some comments here. I'm going to draw the body with a fill style of yellow. I'm going to do ctx.beginPath. Instead of doing a fill rect, I'm going to do ctx.arc, I think was the command to draw a circle. And I'm going to draw that circle with an X and Y position that come from this player info. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to say that the X and Y position of this circle will be the 0, 1, 2, 3, the 0th position, because that's the X coordinate. So this will be the X coordinate of our circle. And then the Y coordinate of our circle will be this value here, 0, 1, 2, 3 from the array. And these are square parentheses. The radius can be, it's going to be a little bit of guess and check, so I'm going to make the radius 40 pixels. And I'm going to draw the entire circle from 0 to 2 times math.pi, which is radians. And then I'm going to do ctx.fill. Alright, so when we come over here to our canvas, we should see nothing. If we type in draw backgrounds, it should draw our backgrounds. If we type draw player, we actually have to pass in, you see it says the function requires player info. I'm going to pass in this list of player info. And let's see if we draw player is not defined. Okay, so I made an error here. The name of the variable that we're passing in is player info. So we want to go to the player info list and get the 0th and first values. So let's see if this works better. So I'm just going to go draw player. Actually, you know what? There's a shorthand way to do this. If you scroll up and down in the console using the up and down arrow keys, you can do that, and it should have drawn my player there. Okay, I always forget to do this. Fill is an action, so we need to have the parentheses there. Okay, I'm so glad I'm debugging this. It's been a long holiday. There we go, our player is drawn. All right, so you could have your player just be a circle if you want, but I think it might be more interesting to make our player have a couple of eyes. So I'm going to do a left eye. And it's going to be very similar to this. So I'm going to grab this information and copy and paste it. But I'm going to start off with a black circle. Then I'm going to make like a white center to the eye. And then maybe a black pupil inside. So this will be black, the first circle, the largest one. Then we'll begin a path. Now, thinking about the x and y coordinates of this circle, the eye should be a little bit higher up. So I'm going to subtract maybe about 10 in order to raise the y coordinate for the center of the eye. And then I'm also going to subtract 10 from the x value so that it moves the eye a little bit to the left, because the x coordinate should be a little bit lower to be to the left. I'm going to make the radius of the eye a lot smaller, so maybe something like 20. Let's see how that looks. And instead of continually writing draw player here, I'm going to write draw player here. And that way, every time we run our code, not only will we teach it how to draw the player, but we'll run this command here as well. Okay, I've made my eye too big. 20 was not so good of a first guess. Actually, it's pretty cool. I could imagine that I kind of like that, actually. Maybe I'll make the player a little bit larger. No, that's too large. Okay, so I'm going to make the player 50, and I'm going to make the radius here 15. Let's see how that looks. I think the player is still too large. I'm going to go back to 40. Okay, cool. Now let's see if we're going to have room. I think if I put a second eye there, they're going to start to overlap, which might actually be okay, but let me move it a little bit further to the left. I'm seeing that since the radius is 15 here, if I only move it 10 to the left, there'll be some middle overlap between the left and right eye. So let me move it, I don't know, 16 to the right, to the left. Okay, perfect. All right, now I'm going to continue to draw the left eye. So I'm also going to include an iris, which will be white. So I'm copying and pasting that code. I'll fill style white. I'm going to have the same center, so I'm not going to change the x and y values. I'm just going to make the radius a little bit smaller, so maybe 13. So that will be the white part of the eye. And then I'm going to give him a pupil that's maybe, I don't know, let's do dark red. So same center. And then I'm going to make the radius much smaller here, like 5. And let's see how that looks. Okay, it's a little bit creepy. Let's see. Maybe I can move it a little bit further down. So I'll subtract less from the y value. Okay, that's kind of cool. All right, so since this was the left eye, I'm going to copy and paste the entire code for the left eye. Now thinking about the right eye, it's going to be symmetrical about the center of the circle. So the only thing that's going to change is the y coordinate will be the same. It'll be at the same relative height on the y-axis, but a different x value. It'll be, instead of minus 16, maybe plus 16. So everywhere where I see minus 16 for the right eye, I'm going to make it plus 16. And of course, you don't have to use these graphics. This will be whatever you want the graphics to be for your game. Okay, so there's my player character. And I'm going to look at making him move now. So, in order to make him move, let's see. We've got our player info. We've got our draw background and draw player functions. So in order to make this a game, what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's create a set interval function that will repeatedly draw the screen and update the player's position. So set interval. We're going to define a function here. It doesn't require any extra information. And we're going to refresh our screen, let's see, every 25 milliseconds. So whenever we refresh our screen, we're going to draw the background, which is that function that we wrote here. So we're saying make the background light green. Then we're going to draw the player. And now we should see our player just get drawn on the light green screen. Okay, draw player, reading 0. Oh man, every time we run our draw player function, I have to input in our player info. So let me make sure that I'm inputting that information into the function, because it needs to know the X and Y positions of the player to draw this. Alright, so we've got our player. So lastly here, we need to have our update player function. And I'm going to put the update player function before we draw the player, so that our player will be at the new position. We're also going to need to pass in our player function, or player info, to the update player function. So let's see here. When we update the player, we have to define the function. So let's say function update player. And now the update player commands are going to require the player info. And what we'll say here is that the X coordinate of the player, so player info, 0 is the X coordinate from kind of our template here, will be equal to the old X coordinate plus the X speed, which will make the player move to the right or to the left, depending on if the X speed is positive or negative. So player info, 0, the X coordinate, is equal to the old X coordinate plus the speed, which is 0, 1, 2. And the old Y coordinate, 1, or the new Y coordinate should be equal to, oh, sorry, I should have put the 0 there. The lag on here when I'm recording the video is pretty rough. And then player info 3. So just make sure you included that the 0th value, the X coordinate, is equal to the 0th value, the old X coordinate, plus the X speed. The Y coordinate is equal to the old Y coordinate, the first value, plus the Y speed, which is 0, 1, 2, 3. So now that we've included this, our player should move to the right. Sweet! We can speed our player up in 2 ways. We can update the frame rate of the game so that it's drawing the screens faster, so every 15 milliseconds. Let's try refreshing that a couple times. Or if you want your player to move faster, you can change this value to a faster speed like 2, and he'll move twice as fast. There we go. Okay, so let's see. Updating the player. The player is always moving to the right at this point. So I'm thinking what we could do next is we could actually have it respond to the arrow keys. So when we want to respond to input from the keyboard or from the mouse, that will be an event that happens on the page when they press a key. So what we're going to do here is outside of the setInterval function, we're going to say to our computer that we want the window to have an event listener. And we want the entire listener has an E there. We want the entire window to listen for when we press on the keyboard. So we're going to have a key down event. And we're going to run a function when we do that. And let's just do, make sure it's working. Let's do a console.log. So every time we press a button now, our window should scream out, Okay, let's see. I'm in the console. Okay, when I'm in the window here, every time I press a button, it logs an extra so the event is working. If that doesn't happen for you, check out your code here. All right, so what we really want to do, though, is we want to get information about which key was actually pressed. So whenever we have an event that happens, it creates a group of information called the event object, and we're going to pass that into our function here. So our function will have information about what event happened. In order to see that information, we can do a console.log the event. And now this will allow us, whenever we press a key, to go in and see some information about that. So the information that I'm particularly interested in is what happens when I press an arrow key. So let me press the left arrow. So it looks to me like this information shows up in a couple of places, the code and the key. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change this to say, okay, console.log, go into the event object, which is this group of information, and just log the key. And I think this should just give me, okay, so here we go, right, left, up, down, shift. So whatever key I'm pressing, it's telling me that key, which is awesome. Okay, so now let's use this information. What I'm going to do is, when we press this key down, I'm going to set the player speeds in both the X and Y components. So the X speed, I'm going to set it to 0. And then I'm going to set the Y speed to 0. And these are coming from that player array up here. So this 0, 1, 2, and 3 here. And then what I'm going to say is, based on the key, change these values to the right values. So we're resetting them to 0, and then we say if the event.key is equivalent to, and I have to get the capitalization right here, arrow right, then I'm going to make the x speed, which is 2, equal to, and right should be positive, so I'm going to make it equal to 1. Actually, wait, let's see. Am I doing 1 or 2 here? I'm doing 2, it looks like, for my player speed, so I'm going to make it equal to 2. I'm going to copy and paste this a handful of times, and I'm going to do some else ifs. So else if it's equal to arrow left. So how would this change if we press the left arrow? Well, we want the x coordinate to move to the left, which would mean decreasing. So the x coordinate speed will go down by 2 each time. All right, now we'll say else if it's up. How will this change? Well, to go up, what we want is we'll say the y speed, which is the third value in the array. Am I doing player? Oh my god, these are all player info. I keep calling it player. I think in an old version of this, I called it player. So if the player info array, or we'll update the values in the player info array. So player info, third value, 0, 1, 2, 3 here. That speed should be going up, means since this is a weird y-axis, right? So here y is 0, here y is 600, so when we go up, we're decreasing the y value. So we'll make the y value, the y speed, negative. And finally, if we're going down, then what we'll do is we'll make the y speed positive because the y value is increasing as we go down. So let me comment out this console.log and see if things are working. So I'm going to do a refresh here. I have to click on the screen. And when I press the arrows now, you'll notice that it actually moves. If yours is not moving, it might be because you're in the console and it doesn't register those as clicks. So make sure that after you refresh your screen, you click off of the console and you are on the screen. And now your player will actually move around. Super cool. All right, the last thing with the player movement is I don't want my player to be able to move off the screen because that kind of ruins the game. So there's a variety of ways to handle this. I'm just going to make the player Pac-Man over to the other side. So the last part about updating our player, so now I'm going to go into the update function, is I'm going to say if the player's x value is greater than 800, then if the player's x value, player info, the 0th coordinate, the x value here, 0, 1, 2, 3. So if the x coordinate is bigger than 800, it'll mean we're off the screen over here. Then I'm going to set the player info x coordinate to, I'm going to move the player all the way to the left-hand side. I'm going to create a series of similar statements here. I'm going to say if the else, or I guess if, or else if, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to say if the player, I'll do else if. That way I won't run it. I'll do it back to back. So if the player's x-coordinate is less than 0, if we're off the screen over here, then we'll set it to, if we're off the screen, if we're less than 0, then we'll set our x-coordinate to 800. And I'm going to copy and paste these two, and I'm going to do it for the y value. So I'm going to give myself a little comment here, Pac-Man, style handling of the edges. And we can look at other ways to handle this if you want your character to bounce off the screen, off the edges, or whatever. Okay, so if the player's y-coordinate is bigger than 600, then we'll set the y-coordinate to 0. If the player's y-coordinate is less than 0, then we'll set the y-coordinate to 600. All right, let's see if we Pac-Man. Cool. Let's see if we Pac-Man in this direction. Cool. I'm going to go to the left now to see if I Pac-Man in that direction. Nice. I'm going to go up to see if I Pac-Man in this direction. Nice. All right, so we've got our player moving around, and that is the end of today's video. Hopefully you guys found it interesting to see how we combined all of the Canvas art principles with some new ideas like registering the key presses in order to define the player's movement more, what's the right word here? More responsively. All right, see you guys. Bye.